I know we've all heard the term God forsaken. We've all probably at some times in our lives felt as if God had forgotten about us, that God was not present. And I don't know if you have felt that way, but I know I have. I grew up what I would describe as a daddy's girl. I had this incredible dad who really just showed all of us in our family unconditional love. He was doting. He was always there to listen and to help. And a few years ago, several years ago, actually, he was had a disease that we knew he would not recover from. We knew that it would take his life. And through that time, I remember praying that one beginning that he would be healed, and he wasn't. I prayed that his suffering would be limited, or that he wouldn't suffer, and he did. And then toward the end of his life, I prayed that God would take him, and it seemed as if his suffering would just continue and continue and continue. And so one day I had one of those sort of fist shaking conversations with God. I was angry, and I felt totally forsaken by God. I felt God had forsaken our family and my father. I had one of those conversations that we read about in the Psalms, that we don't think that we will ever be one of those people. And so one day I just said to God, I said, God, gosh, I don't know what's going on here. We've prayed for Dad to be healed, and he hasn't. We've prayed that he wouldn't suffer, and he has. We've prayed for you to take his life so that his suffering will end, and he lingers and lingers and lingers. And then I said something to God. I said, God, are you even there? Do you hear us? Do you care? Do you answer our prayers? And then I said, God, I would love an answer, but I don't really expect one. And in that moment, I grabbed my Bible, and I was headed off to the gym to work out. And I got to the gym, and I got on the Stairmaster, and as I was going along, I opened up my Bible, and out of it flitted this page, and it just kind of, as it was floating down from the Stairmaster, I reached down to try to catch this page before it hit the ground. And it was a devotional. It had been a page I had torn out of the upper room, I bet about a year before. And as I looked down at it, it became the answer to my prayer. Because in it was a verse from Isaiah. It says, sing for joy, O heavens. Exult, O earth. Break forth, O mountains, into singing. For God has remembered his people. God has shown compassion on his people. But Zion says, my God has forgotten me. My God has forsaken me. And God says, can a mother forget her nursing child, or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. And in that moment, and reading that verse, I realized that was an answer to my prayer. And I felt in that moment God's love and mercy and care and compassion flowing down. And I knew that God heard our cries, and that God answered our prayers, and that God cared for my father, and that God would take care of my father. And in the days and the weeks to come, it's as if God's presence was everywhere in that moment. And I knew that my dad was not God forsaken, and neither was I. It was truly an incredible moment. We are not the only ones who feel as if we are sometimes God forsaken. If God has somehow turned God's back on us, or that God doesn't hear our prayers or our cries. Jesus felt that way too. So in Matthew and Mark's Gospels, Jesus only says one thing. He cries out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus feels in this moment as if God has turned God's back on him. And yet, Jesus knows in his own heart that even though he feels forsaken by God, that he isn't forsaken by God. The wonderful thing about Jesus saying this on the cross, admitting this, that even in his absolute darkest moment, He feels as if he is God forsaken. The wonderful thing about that is that because it gives us permission to be able to be honest with God. It gives us the permission to know sometimes it's okay if we feel that way too. Matthew and Mark's gospel depict Jesus's words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" in his own native tongue of Aramaic. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Why in other places don't we hear much Aramaic from Jesus? I think it's important that these writers included this here. There's a great reason for that, and that is because they want us, as we stand around the cross and we listen to these words, that we realize that we are hearing the intimacy of the actual words that Jesus prays out loud to God. These words draw us into the intimacy of our relationship with Christ as we hear him speak in his own language and his own tongue and cry out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? What is interesting about these words of Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me, is that they actually come from a psalm. They're a prayer that Jesus cries out to God. And it comes from Psalm 22. So hear these words. My God, why have you forsaken me? What is interesting about this is that if Jesus had kept going, he would also say words that we sometimes want to say out loud. Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer me, and by night, but find no rest. Jesus would have known this psalm backward and forward. He would have sung it when he went to synagogue. They would have said this psalm around the dinner table. He knows he really isn't abandoned because he knows what comes next in the psalm. This is really a psalm of trust. He says, the psalm says these words, Jesus knows these words. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you, our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you, they cried and were saved. In you, they trusted and were not put to shame. Jesus' words from the cross reflect more from Psalm 22. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. These are close to the same words that the mockers offer to Jesus as they surround him on the cross. But here is the beautiful part of this psalm that Jesus knows. On you I was cast from my birth, and since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near and there is no one to help. Jesus knows the rest of the words. If Jesus had had the strength to keep talking, to keep saying the rest of the psalm, to keep singing, others might have joined in these words. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but he heard when I cried to him. Jesus knows and trusts that God hears his words and his cries. He knows that God is actually near. Jesus knows the entire psalm, just like he knows the entire arc of history, and he knows the entire arc of your life and my life. He knows the darkness that we have there. And these words are spoken as words not of defeat, but words of victory that we can go to and claim in our own darkest moments. Listen to the rest of this psalm. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. To him, indeed, shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. Jesus knows the end of the story. He knows that God is with him, even though he doesn't feel it, and he trusts that he will be delivered, and all the ends of the earth will know that he has come and he has delivered them.
That was interesting, the part about the psalm.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I'll share. Yeah. Also, and David here in the psalm predicts Jesus' crucifixion so accurately. It's unbelievable, because if you look here, verse 22, it says, verse 16 down, it says, dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life, from the power of the dogs. Well, dogs were another name for the Gentiles. Rescue me from the mouths of the lions and the wild horse. I will declare your name among the people. And it goes on as what she quoted. But just so accurately predicts crucifixion of Jesus. It's amazing. We are on the third one, and we just watched the video.
No, I will never be able to make it here by 6. The
That's
fact
okay.
that I can make it here at 6:15.
No, I'm excited you're here.
Normally,
I'm
I
just
would
so
be
I'm
able to
sorry.
till
I'm just
7.
saying I'm sorry you missed the video.
Normally, I don't be able to
So,
till 7.
the phrase that he writes here, my God, why have you forsaken me, actually comes from Psalm 22, and it's David's picture of the suffering of the Messiah in Psalm 22. Because if you go down to 16, it describes the crucifixion pretty accurately, and even describes the Romans casting lots for his clothes. I mean, and honestly, she doesn't go into it, but I think that Jesus was also the religious leaders who were mocking him and watching, see if he would do, because they knew he worked miracles. I bet you they were sitting back wondering if what he would do, and I imagine he also was bringing attention that they're fulfilling this song from so long ago.
And why do you think David was saying all these things?
He was in the spirit.
But there's so many times in Psalms, that's why I'm like, this guy has some issues, because there are so many times he's happy and jubilant, and then there's times that he, just
I just wondered if this was a dream that he was having, or maybe, like you said, a vision.
I think as he was writing the music, because this is music. I think as he was writing the music, he was taken in the spirit, because there's even Jesus quotes from the psalm quite a few times. In fact, when the Jewish leaders come in and confront him, and he said, and then Jesus asked him, whose son is the Messiah? You say he's the son of David, but David even said, my Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool, which actually is kind of a poor translation in English, because it actually means Yahweh said to the Messiah, or the Lord, sit at my right hand. So it's a messianic symbol. So then he asked, well, then how can he be David's son if he calls him Lord? And then they're like, oh, no one asked him any more questions after that. It was kind of- but this, she gets into a really powerful chapter on page 37. And oh, let me say this: Aramaic was like the common tongue of the day. It's kind of like the regular speech. It's kind of like how can I say? It's more of the common tongue. It would be kind of like you speak Italian, but Hebrew would be Latin. Does that make sense? So like, even though they speak a form of Latin, which is Italian, and Spanish is a form of Latin as well, and English is a form of Latin as well, they're not quite the same. English is more the common tongue, and Latin would be more the more erudite, educated thing at the time. So, so people, on page 37, the second paragraph down, says, people can feel forsaken too. My guess is that all of us have experienced feelings as if we were abandoned by God at some point in our lives. I had my brother-in-law, or my sister's first husband, and he, and I tried to minister to him and talk to him about God, and he just went off expletives about God and this and that. And I just sat there and listened to him just like freak out, basically. And I finally said, why are you so upset? He said, Jim, don't you know that when I was a boy, both my parents were in a car crash and they died, and I never got to see them again. And then at that moment, I realized why he was so angry, and he held God responsible for it from a small boy through his life. But it felt like God had purposely forsaken him. And so I had to kind of, get past the gruffness, find out, what was going on there. And, I haven't yelled at God much, but there has been a few times where I was so upset that I did question. I said, God, I don't get this. Why? And just so upset. And we can feel that way, that God has forsaken us. But it's so not true. I think as we grow as believers, we kind of realize that I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling distressed, and these emotions are making me feel as if God has forsaken me. And
Well, people aren't being truthful if they say they've never questioned God. They're not being truthful, because it's just so easy to think, God, what did I do to deserve that? And some people never, I know that even if you have the problems that Job had, you still have to look for that hope.
because without God, there is no hope. And, I remember a story about this rabbi who seen his people taken during the, of course, everything goes back to the Holocaust, but he was watching it, and someone said, God's letting this happen. God doesn't care about us, and this and that. And so he just looked at the man and he said, if you had the power of God, would you stop this? And he said, yes, I would. Right now, I would stop it all. He said, okay. If you had the wisdom of God and the power of God, would you stop this? And he understood, and he said, it's one thing to have the power of God, but not his understanding. To have his understanding, then we would know why. And so it really kind of boils down to that question of, why are you letting this happen? And sometimes that question doesn't get answered. That's where the faith comes in, where we have to rely that, God's going to bring me through this. God's going to work something good out of this. He said he can take evil that's done to us and he can turn it into something good. He said that he can bring us through, supply our needs. And so that's kind of the moment where we kind of have to lean on our faith, because we're not going to get that answered question why until after the other side of heaven, you know.
And you know, that's strange that, you know, you said that about your brother-in-law, and people like that are the most unhappy people.
Yeah.
Because they have no hope. They have nothing to lean on, you know.
Yeah, I think he's gotten better. He's gotten better over the years. Hopefully. Hopefully. So, yeah, where she said on page 38 at the top of the paragraph, she says, she gets to a point where she says to God, do you hear our prayers? Do you even care? I would love an answer, but I really don't expect one anymore. You know,
That's when you're really going through something rough.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody going through a rough time, you feel that, and you always come through it, but in the midst of that moment.
actually, that's I got saved on, even though my grandmother brought us in church, kind of planted seeds and gave me the foundation I needed for later on in life. But when I was on I was working for the Corps of Engineers, and I was working for this colonel, and we were rebuilding the levees after Katrina. And I was working in Louisiana, I was working all through there, and when I got to the job site early, I had my crew wouldn't come till later. I was probably there at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was just sitting on Lake Pontchartrain, and I was watching these porpoises come in, and the sun was rising. I was completely miserable. I was so fed up with life. I was fed up with the way things are. I'd seen quite a few tragedies, quite a few, new bodies. And I just laid into God. I was by myself. I was sitting on there, and just this beautiful, serene area, and I was just miserable. It was gorgeous. The sun coming up, you see these dolphins arching in the water. It was just, but I was just yelling at God, and just saying, God, I don't understand why you created life this way. I don't even know who you are. It doesn't make sense, and I just went in and laid in on him, and I went and sat in my truck. I waited for my crew to show up. I turn on the radio station, and I didn't listen to Christian radio, and an evangelist comes on, and he answers every single one of my questions that I asked in order, one after the other. And something came over me, and I knew that God had spoken to me through that person. And I remember called my best friend up. It's like, hey, John, man, it's probably 6 o'clock in the morning at this point. John, man, I think God just, he was back in Houston at the time. He's like, dude, what are you're crazy, man. I'm going back to sleep. I was like, God, I think God just spoke to me. And I ran back to my hotel room, and I picked up the Gideon Bible that was in the hotel room, and I started reading, and I didn't understand a lick of it. And finally I got on my knees and I started praying, God, I finally got an answer that I know you're there now, but I can't understand your word. Can you help me understand your word? And ever since then, that was kind of the journey, the turning point in my life that shifted me on to, I got back involved in church, got back involved in mission works overseas, and then of course when everybody kept, saying you're going to become a minister one day. Yeah, me? At your time. But seriously, but it was in that moment that I just unleashed my frustration. I didn't know anything about the Psalms. And when you read the Psalms, David, and a few times he lets loose, just like right here. He's like, God, Why have you forsaken me? Where are you? Are you even listening? Do you care? And it's okay because God is big enough and he understands our frustration. He understands what we're going through. And he's already has a plan. He's already seen it and what he's going to do in the midst of it. Even though we don't feel like it, we don't feel like he's there because we're suffering in that moment. So we can't feel anything but that pain. We can't hear anything but that pain. But God's going to work it out for something good. Just like he did for her, where just this scripture falling out of her Bible while she's working out. It's just this beautiful image of Isaiah.
It's kind of like I wish everyone that was in the church Sunday could have heard your message about the revival, that one verse, and I wrote it down, and now I can't remember what it was, the verse you put up there.
Cleanse your hands, you sinners? Was it James? Or was it the song?
It's the little.
Will you revive us again, Lord? Yeah. And God, we need it. I've been praying for about 10 years now. I'm going to keep praying too. And I think God will. And I think even at the, and through the midst of all of this and this great suffering and this terrible, tragic day of the cross and Christ, where's Christ now? At the right hand of God. And so even what seemed like the darkest day in history, which it was overshadowed by what God brought out of it. Does that make sense? And so tragedy, if we give God even our tragedy, in fact, Proverbs tells us that he will trade our ashes for beauty. If we give him our tragedies, our ashes, our brokenness or broken that, he will take it and make something so extraordinary out of it. And it will be something beautiful. And then I didn't know she was writing this during the COVID.
Yeah,
I was
like, boy, she got this out.
Yes, she did. She brought a time on her hand.
And I didn't get it published and printed, and I was like, whoa, she was working hard.
Well, we were in lockdown for a year, so well, a little less than a year.
Next week it'll be exactly a year. The 17th is when we went to work on the 16th and we didn't go back on the 17th, and I thought we'll just finish this week out,
No.
And I was thinking that, and they ended up making us come back to work, so we didn't even get to have, for some reason, the governor's office determined our agency essential, and I was like, nobody's working, nobody wants to go to work right now. And when unemployment's giving you more money than you made when you were working.
That's what my sister-in-law, she manages a Hobby Lobby. And when they started back to work, she said, we're having trouble getting people to come to work.
Yeah.
Because they can make more money. I said, that is terrible.
And they deemed us essential. We ain't essential.
Yeah, it's she surprised me, and then here it was a couple 100,000, and worldwide 1 million. So she probably had this thing done 6 months ago, or maybe a little bit less. Amazing. I think that was on page 40, 41. Also think that the book of Hebrews tells us that Jesus, we don't have a high priest that can't relate to us, that he experienced every area of our temptations, our weaknesses, our struggles, all of those things. And so we have a mediator between us and God that literally understands everything that we're going through, not an abstract being that's never felt pain or never felt this or that. He became one of us and felt hunger. He felt loneliness. He felt rejection. He felt hate and mockery and shame and pain, unbearable pain. And God, unbearable pain.
And it's not lost in the story that, he died for our sins.
Yeah.
But he went through a horrible, horrible death to get there. And that's kind of, look at some of the trials we've been through. Not as bad as crucifixion,
Yeah.
but it's been horrible, and we've lived through it and come out on the other side, and we're still with God. And that, you kind of have to look at it that way too.
Absolutely. And Romans were very good at torture. The cross is so cruel because the way I've listened to the doctors give an explanation on crucifixion, and she did a great job too. But when they put you up like this and put your arms in a certain position, what happens is it puts pressure on your lungs, and your lungs, you can't breathe, and your lungs start to fill with fluid, and it's like you're drowning. It's the wildest thing. So then you have to push up to take a breath, but you got a nail through your foot. So you have to push up on that horrific nail just to get a breath. And Jesus lasted for 6 hours. And that's why, that's why they broke their legs. Not Jesus's legs, but they broke the other two's legs. And there's a reason they didn't break Jesus' legs, because he was already dead, and that's why they pierced him. But it also fulfilled the scriptures. The scriptures tell us that not one of his bones were broken. They were just out of joint. And that we would only look upon him. God said that we would only look upon him as pierced, not as gangly, broken. And so, and then she kind of just talks about Jesus's praying 42 to 43, and this pax romana, and on top of 45, the second sentence down, it says, have you or someone you know ever uttered thoughts or thought these sentiments? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. We can just relate so much to that in that moment. I've heard so many sermons on this topic. Everyone's kind of looked at it from so many different angles. From at that moment, he was sin incarnate, and so that was God kind of cutting himself off from his human side, feeling abandoned by having that God didn't perform a miracle to let this cup pass from him, but being faithful even unto death. So it's you guys have anything on that? But I also think that Jesus had already kind of prepared his disciples, because if you go down on 45, he talks about his disciples, and even told the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, you tear this temple down, which he's talking about himself, not the actual physical temple. If you tear this temple down, it will be rebuilt again in 3 days. And then they asked him, well, why don't you do a miracle? And he says, why don't you give us a great sign? And he says, well, the only sign you'll be given is the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man spend 3 days in the belly of the earth. He also said, he even told his disciples before they even entered Jerusalem, as they were on their way there, he said, I'm going to be handed over, I'm going to be tortured and mocked and crucified. So he kind of prepared them, but I don't know if they just
I don't think they paid attention.
I think they didn't either. I think, because it's kind of like they were just always, I don't know. when you read about them, it's kind of like they were listening, but they weren't listening.
To me, I relate that to stories when people talk about a grandparent who has a very close relationship to a grandchild, and they say, I'm not going to be here much longer. And they're giving them life lessons and things like that. And the grandchild, even if it's an adult grandchild, they're like, they just don't take it to heart because they're just so used to them being there.
Like Peter, he told him that someone would deny him 3 times. And
Never.
and then the second it came out of his mouth, he thought,
Exactly. It's kind of, they were, I don't know, did they just not? And that's kind of the funny thing is when Jesus is telling them in parables, and he uses a couple simple parables. One was about the yeast of the Pharisees, which just basically means they're going to cause people to rise up against us. I mean, it's just a basic analogy. I mean, be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees because it gets in the dough and it causes the dough to rise up. Well, people are going to come and rise against you. So be careful against what their sayings are and all this other stuff, which is like a simple analogy. And they continue to ask him, what do you mean? And Jesus, my favorite part is Jesus goes, are you still so dull? Come on, get sharp. What are you doing? And they kind of didn't get it, maybe they just felt like, well, we're with the Messiah. The Messiah is going to be invincible. We saw him calm a storm with a word. We saw him feed 5,000. We saw him completely restore lepers who were just falling apart. We saw him heal the blind. We saw him raise the dead, like right before Passover. He raised 2 different people from the dead. He raised a little girl and he raised Lazarus.
And these were all just simple-minded, ordinary people who didn't think in-depthly.
And they saw, like Jimmy said, they saw him do all that. It was within their realm, their thought that he could get out of this too.
Yeah. Because there was a couple times where they said that the Jews and the religious authorities had picked up stones to stone him, and he kind of like disappeared. There was like kind of an instance where he just vanished, and everybody was like, pretty much. Because maybe they thought, he's gonna get out of this. But God has other plans. I love how in the Psalm it predicts that a people not yet born will say, he did it. He did it. He accomplished what no one else could accomplish. He reconciled man to God once again. It's amazing. And she just kind of goes on about the feeling of being forsaken by God. And I can't tell you how many people I come across that tell me that they cannot be forgiven by God, that they've done too many terrible things, that God doesn't, I have one guy who was an alcoholic. He was really bad alcoholic. I would constantly invite him to church. I was, come on, why don't you come to church, man? Come on. And, well, I don't want to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Well, you got to start somewhere, man. Just come. No, I don't want to be a hypocrite about the whole thing, so I just won't go. Come on, man. Every time I invited him, he was a really nice guy, nicest guy I ever met. And I hope he did fine, because he eventually did die from drinking himself to death. And years later, and I'd heard that he had a stroke, and I hoped that he was doing okay. But anyway, so but I hear people all the time that maybe they think they are forsaken by God. I know that no one, no matter what they've done, is out of the reach of God's grace. I think God's grace is more powerful than any sin. God's grace and mercy will overcome anything, any evil, any moment of weakness, any moment of tragedy. It's greater than all of those things. That's why we sang Sunday, Grace, grace, God's grace. Grace that is greater than all our sins. Love that song. And then on page 46, she brings up the Exodus of oh, those Israelite people. God himself, or it was Moses said they were a stiff-necked people. It says she says that basically that their feet weren't even dry before they were complaining about being.
Why'd you bring us out of here?
What? I ain't got no water. They had just seen all these miracle plagues, these mighty plagues that forced the most powerful country at that time to its knees on their behalf, and just parted part of the Mediterranean Ocean. Okay.
But they do it multiple times. It's like,
I know.
when I would study Bible lessons for like kids Sunday school, and it was on the whole Old Testament, and I'll be reading like, again? It's like every book. Old Testament, I'm like, why can't these people learn? I mean, because their ancestors, the grandparents would tell stories and the kids would hear it, and it's like, again, it just never
Like
stops.
say about history repeating itself.
Yeah. My question was, why did they never just ask? Instead of grumbling about it, like kind of like, well, aren't you ever gonna do this or that? Or why not just go, Lord, we're thirsty and our animals need water. Is there any way you can provide water for us? Or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Instead of we know you got us here to kill us. You're like,
We did provide manna from heaven.
yeah. Oh wow. And then she gives a story about her father passing, and on page 47. But I love how she shares this verse from Isaiah on page 48. From Isaiah 49, 13 through 16. Sing for joy, O heavens, and exalt, O earth. Break forth, O mountains, into singing. For the Lord has comforted his people, and will have compassion on his suffering ones. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me. And the Lord replied, I added that. Can a woman forget her nursing child, or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands.
What does he mean when he said, but Zion said?
Israel. Israel said, the Lord's forsaken us. We've been through a lot. And, the Babylonians, the Midianite raiders, the Egyptian captivity, the Syrians, and eventually the Romans. And yeah, they had been through a lot. And a lot was their own doing. Because God said, I will bless you or I will curse you based on whether you will keep this. And they did not keep it. And because of that, they were punished. In fact, when they were doing a archaeological digs on some of the old sites, or where the city, the modern city of Jerusalem is, almost everywhere they dug, they found idols. Everywhere they dug, they found this little pregnant woman with no head, no legs, no arms. It was a fertility idol, and they all kept it. They all had it. I mean, everywhere they dug, they found these things. So idolatry was extreme and rampant, literally everywhere in Israel. And that was like the one thing God, it's like commandment.
Yeah.
My goodness. Out of all the commandments on murder, stealing, and everything, God said, don't do idolatry.
Well, and whenever Moses went up on the mountain to be with God in those 40 days, they ambushed Aaron and built the calf out of the gold, so it was it's like they had to have, it was just, to me, I look at it from their mindset, like all these idols in their generation of people at the time. That's what they felt they had to have in order to function.
Shrines and stuff everywhere. And in fact, the priests that were supposed to be the Levites that were set aside, is it Jeremiah? I believe Jeremiah. And God took Jeremiah and he showed him. He like took him around the city supernaturally and showed him, look behind this wall, and show that as soon as the priests get off from the duties, they go and start worshiping other shrines. And just
Wow.
yeah, and that's why the Babylonian captivity came. But God even gave him a chance after chance. In fact, he even told the king, look, if you will just simply do justice, there's people in your prisons right now that didn't do anything wrong, except, maybe say something against the thing. If you, release them. And he did at first, but then he doubled back because he had bad advisors. And the advisors were saying, well, I speak for God. And that man was struck down. I would never, ever, ever say, unless God told you specifically, I would not. And I just like how if you did sing a line from some of the most famous hymns, you would immediately just recognize them. This Little Light of Mine, and Jesus Loves Me, and Amazing Grace. I mean, yeah. It's just, I think a lot of folks at the time probably sang just hymn after hymn in the synagogues. That were the Psalms. I wonder if is there ever a good book, since you're that I've never seen it, but that turned the Psalms into music that has them on there.
There's different psalms that have been written into, different things. You had to take a lot of research because they've done many of them, It's funny because when I started back to church after I was an adult and gone through college and all that kind of stuff, and I would, the preacher would read a Bible verse and I was like, we sang a song with that in it, so they use it. I know that was in that song I sang, so they put a lot of it in there. So, but as far as the whole thing, no,
Yeah, I think God gave us music. There's something different about it, especially if you get a good rhythm going, or a good song. It can speak to you, it can move you, it can put you in a totally different frame of mind, from joy to being goofy to being sad. And music is just such a powerful expression of our inner emotional states. And the Psalms kind of really encapsulate that. I remember David, and trying to think, it was when he was running from Saul, and he was so just frustrated that he just basically cried out like he did here as well, like, God, I'm crushed. I'm utterly crushed. There's nothing left of me. I mean, it was so dramatic, but it was how he felt, and David just did a great job of expressing that, and David even had people who would surround the temple and the ark, and they would just sing and praise God continually. And I think when they rededicated the temple, they had that same thing, just as David had told them to do that. All right. Here, Jeremiah. Jeremiah on page 51, it says, my joy is gone, grief is upon me, my heart is sick. Hark the cry of my poor people. From far and wide in the land, is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king not in her? The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. For the hurt of my poor people I have hurt. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my poor people not been restored? Jeremiah 8:18-22. This was a hymn, and the hymn takes the opposite tack. Yes, there is a balm in Gilead. Yes, there is a physician. Yes, the Lord is in Zion. Yes, God remembers us. What makes this faith statement even more powerful is that there is a balm in Gilead. A balm was kind of like a healing ointment. An African American spiritual was sung by a community that was experiencing racial violence, oppression, and discrimination that seemed like they would never end. But they believed the story would end, not in despair, but victory, because they knew that God in the human person of Jesus had walked their road ahead of them and triumphed over hatred and death. Jesus wants us to lean in and hear his last words, that we may experience the same hope that he had in God, in his heavenly Father, who time after time heard the cries of Israel, offered comfort, and delivered them. Yep, it's and I think she just kind of goes into what we can do with FaceTime, Zoom, and phone calls, and just checking on people and seeing how they're doing. And, does anybody want to say anything else on this subject?
I thought it was a great summary when she said that the words of Jesus became an inspiration to follow his example of caring for those who feel abandoned or forgotten. These words aren't just meant to these words are not just meant to reassure us, they're meant to challenge us, to remind us that here on earth we are Jesus' hands and feet, and we are called to reach out to those who feel that hope is lost, who feel that God has forsaken them, and show them that they are not alone. I mean, that's like the perfect summary.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know, when somebody is talking to you and it's not just like blowing them off. It's like just stop and listen.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus would do.
And I think you're so right, and I think we've got to a place where we don't make connections like we used to, because like if you pass someone says how are you, and then the other person says I'm fine, then they say how are you, and then that person says I'm fine, and a lot of times sometimes they're not fine, but they don't ever maybe feel safe enough or comfortable enough to say, you know what, I got a lot going on. This is what's going on at home. This is what's going on in my life. But I have a son in the hospital, or I have my parents, or whatever it could be. I think as Christ's representatives on earth, the only Christ some people will ever see, as that old saying, it's for us to let people know that we're here. We'll listen. We actually care. We do want to know. We don't want the arbitrary out.
Or just even a step further is how many times are you approached by a stranger, homeless or not, and you're too freaked out to even grace their presence.
Yeah.
You
know. I usually let homeless people, if I'm giving them a ride, I usually let them in the front seat. Some guy couldn't. He just smelled so bad from some type of alcohol. I don't know what it was.
probably combination of alcohol and urine. That's what we get.
And it was so powerful. I was like, man, I don't mind giving you a ride, brother, but you're gonna have to live in the bed of the truck. That's cool. I got a blanket here for you. And it was too bad. I had the windows down, and we were going about 60, and I could still
Smell it.
like, how is it beating the wind? Like, how was
We have cars that pull up to drop kids off, and we're all going, oh, you know.
And they know those kids live in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Samantha would tell me when she'd open the backpack, roaches
Oh, yeah.
or rotten food, like they would
Yes,
never check
yes.
their kids.
We had one little boy, one day, it hadn't been too long ago, they let him out. And they kind of threw the backpack out with him, and the people in the car were laughing. And anyway, the paraprofessional just reached down and handed him the backpack, and he would not take it. And she held it a few minutes, and then she realized, and I can't remember whether Kathleen told me there was rotten food in it or maybe dirty clothes from the day before that he'd had an accident on himself. Plus, it smelled like weed. It had been in the car, and they had been smoking. And so that, yeah, I understand why the kid didn't want to pick it up. And you just never know what kids are going through and living through, and
Yeah.
what makes them act the way they do. And
I think that sometimes you just gotta have a little grace and say, there's a reason this person's acting this way. You know, there's a reason they put up some kind of wall here, and kind of shirk it off. You know, because if my brother-in-law would have, say, a regular churchgoer would have asked him, about God, and he would have responded with curses and curse language and profanity, they may have, oh, that guy's a devil, instead of just let them blow vent, and then going, why do you feel that way? I don't understand. And then he can finally, in a college, I don't want to keep it too long. Okay. I had this professor in philosophy, and he was talking about this incident over in Europe where this guy had put his artwork, which was basically a cross in a jar filled with urine, on display, and so it was this big controversy. And honestly, I think artists do that too.
yeah, that's what they're trying to do.
We get attention. Yeah. So but he said that he was molested by a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, and that's how he felt about that.
I
So
understand that then.
So it's kind of like seeing past. Now there are people that are just doing it to get a rise, and there are people that genuinely, but I think it's for us to kind of take a moment and say, God, do you want me to list, be an ear here, or Lord, can I help in this way, or just to kind of be available.
And sometimes you just don't even need to give a voice to something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes just listening.
Or sometimes not getting
Not,
involved.
yeah, what I'm trying to say is, I think we make too much of things sometimes, and we give that person a voice, we give them credibility, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
To feed into.
Yes.
Not to feed into, but sometimes, it's also, for me, for my type of work, and it's like, God, do you want me to just not say anything? Like, now it's not the right time, because sometimes, depending upon what that person's going on in their life, that moment is not the right time to try to let them know, God's not really, because if their heart is too hard, it might make it more hard just based on what their mentality is at the moment.
Before you can plant a seed, if you ever garden, you gotta till up the soil. If you just do it on a hard surface, you won't be able to get in. So sometimes the Holy Spirit has to have a work involved in there, where they've loosened up the soil, then you plant the seed. You're right.
And you have to make yourself able to be approached so that you can plant that seed. You put yourself on another level, high above those that we know aren't living right, then we're not doing them any good.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a last story, and then we'll get out of here. I had this my previous church that I worked, had this kid in Boy Scouts, and all the moms came to me and they were griping at me and they wanted me to kick the boy out. And so then I waited for his grandmother to come pick him up. She said, basically, I'm taking care of him. I'm too old, but I had no choice. His father killed his mother. His father's life sentence. And he was there and saw it all. And so he has some really issues. So then of course, at that point, before the next meeting, I called the school and I tried to get the counselor, hey, could you pay more attention to him? Could you just spend extra time with him? Did you know that this had happened to him? So that, maybe he can get some counseling. And then I told the parents, so I'm not kicking him out. I'm just gonna come work at my station. I'll just keep him with me, keep him away from.
Keep them occupied.
Yeah. Because I just couldn't, in good conscience. I know his behavior was terrible, jumping on the table. He was being erratic as far as making noises and doing what 10-year-old boys do to be annoying. But after his grandmother told me that, I was like, I felt so. My heart was like, I'd be screwed up if I saw that too. So I think we just don't know. And I think it's for us to kind of just have grace with people because they may feel forsaken by God. So when you come to them and say, hey, I'm a Christian, or hey, I want to invite you to a, they may have this adverse reaction because they feel they may have had this tragedy or something. So, all right. Can I pray with you guys about anything?